Number 10. Atomic bomb dome in Hiroshima, Japan. During World War II, U.S. forces made the decision to drop the very first atomic bombs on the Japanese cities Nagasaki and Hiroshima. The blasts caused devastating damage and had long-lasting effects on the people. Today, there's one building still standing from that time, and it serves as a reminder of this shocking piece of history and the destruction nuclear weapons are capable of. The building was constructed a century ago in 1915 by the Czech architect Jan Letzel. It's called the Atomic Bomb Dome. On June 18, 1945, the dome, also known as the Hiroshima Prefectural Industrial Promotion Hall, was forever changed. The first atomic bomb dropped 525 feet away. The blast was immense, with intense pressure and fiery gusts of winds that engulfed everything in their path. Everyone inside the building was killed on impact. The walls crumbled away in the blast and fires, but the central part with its bronze dome remained standing. Because of this and the shape it formed, residents began calling it the Atomic Bomb Dome. Many buildings bombed during World War II were either repaired or rebuilt, but the Atomic Bomb Dome has been left exactly as it was after the tragic events of that day. The skeletal remains of the building now serve as a solemn reminder of what nuclear weapons can do and have done. Number 9. Coventry Cathedral. During World War II, Coventry, England was a prime target for German bombers. The city was home to many factories that made engines, airplanes, and ammunition the British Army needed to keep fighting. Although the grand Gothic Coventry Cathedral would not be the main focus of attacks, the church was still cautious and set up a group of 12 men called the Coventry Cathedral Guard back in 1940. These men would take turns around the clock to watch over the cathedral in case it came under fire. On November 14, 1940, the conditions for the German planes were excellent, with a bright moon guiding their way to potential targets. Coventry soon had countless incendiary bombs raining from the sky, and its cathedral was no exception. Just under an hour after the first air raid sirens went off, Coventry Cathedral had been hit multiple times, with multiple sections all ablaze. The Cathedral Guard worked tirelessly, throwing sand on any flames they could, but it would be a losing battle. The pews were smoldering and the organ was on fire. When the wooden beams of the roof caught, they created a rain shower of flames over the seating below. The guard was forced to admit there was nothing more they could do. As the flames settled the next day after fire crews arrived, the cathedral was a burned-out shell. It was a miracle its grand spire was still standing, something which the locals took comfort in, even though 2/3 of the city's buildings had been damaged during the attack. After the war, the decision was made not to repair or demolish the old Coventry Cathedral, but to keep building alongside it. The old historic building now sits close beside its modern counterpart. 2 of the burned beams from the original structure were put together into a cross, which can be seen in the new building today. Number 8. St. Paul's Cathedral. During the Battle of Britain in October 1940, the UK was hit by heavy German bombings. One night, the city of London came under massive attack, and it kept up night after night. During one of these assaults on October 9th, the iconic dome on top of St. Paul's Cathedral in the heart of the city was pierced by a Luftwaffe bomb, destroying the high altar. In another bombing, a missile hit the roof but did not detonate. The brave people of the St. Paul's Watch who protected the cathedral during the war managed to successfully remove the bomb without setting it off. Aside from these incidents, St. Paul's Cathedral remained mainly unharmed in the Blitz's fury. This led to it becoming a symbol of British resilience and spirit, standing tall while buildings around it burned and crumbled to the ground. In 1944, the sound of St. Paul's bells let the people of London learn about the liberation of France, and 35,000 people flocked to the cathedral in 1945 to commemorate the end of World War II in its entirety. Would you like to visit St. Paul's Cathedral? Tell us in the comments and hit subscribe while you're at it. Number 7. Rapture Palace. Rapture Palace had been a long-standing retreat for royalty. Not far from St. Petersburg, it had been the favored hunting ground for Tsar Nicholas II, the last ruler of the Romanov dynasty and Russia's monarchy. It was also the place Peter III, the husband of the infamous Russian Queen Catherine the Great, met his end after being murdered in 1762. During the siege of Leningrad, it became a retreat for Nazis between 1941 and 1944, thanks to its location having a great view of central St. Petersburg. This allowed the troops stationed at Rapture to launch artillery strikes on the Russian city below with ease and precision. Being a former royal palace, Rapture was filled with priceless artwork and expensive architecture. While the Germans were in position here, the items were taken and the once grand palace was practically stripped bare. The palace was finally freed from enemy control on January 19, 1944, but that wasn't the end of the torment for this once decadent building. The Germans fled Rapture and the surrounding areas after the Leningrad-Novgorod offensive loosened their hold on the area, effectively ending the siege. But they decided they weren't going to leave the palace behind. As they left, they set off explosives, leaving Rapture Palace in utter ruins. The palace has remained in this state ever since. It will be an expansive task to restore it to its former glory. Not only that, but anyone who chooses to take on the renovations will have to be careful and watch out for leftover landmines and bombs left behind by the palace's uninvited Nazi inhabitants. Number 6. The Royal Opera House in Valletta, Malta. The Royal Opera House in Valletta, Malta was a beautiful example of neoclassical architecture featuring ornate columns, grand archways, and detailed stone carvings. Construction was completed back in 1866, and it became a cultural landmark for the island nation, not only for the grand scale of the building, but for the many performances held here by artists from all parts of the globe. But just 7 years later, the first tragedy would strike. The theater went up in flames on May 25, 1873 during rehearsals for Giuseppe Privatera's opera La Vergine del Castello, and its interior was extremely damaged. Thankfully, repairs were made within 4 years and it reopened in 1877. It switched to electricity as a safer alternative to gas lighting in 1895. Audiences would enjoy many more performances at this venue in the coming years, but the curtains would finally close in 1942. On the evening of Tuesday, April 7, 1942, the theater was destroyed in airstrikes by Stuka dive bombers. The once beautiful and grand theater space and a majority of its facades crumbled into rubble, with only the sturdy stone base of the building and some columns left standing. The pride and joy of the city of Valletta had been reduced into ruins. There were many proposals over the following years to reconstruct and renew the Royal Opera House. None were successful, though, until 2013, when the remains of the structure were used to form an open-air theater space, now known as Piazza Teatru Regal. Number 5. The Reichstag. Positioned at the north end of the Albertstraße and near the Spree River's south bank, the Reichstag is one of Berlin's most recognizable sights and tourist attractions. But this building has a long history behind it, most notably from World War II. Construction was completed in 1894, and the building was used as the seat of the German government. Built in neoclassical style, it had imposing columns, large windows, and to crown everything off, a large glass dome on the roof's center. The Reichstag served as the seat of democracy until 1933, when an event happened that would shape not only the building, but the fate of the world. A month after Adolf Hitler was appointed chancellor on February 27th, a fire broke out in the Reichstag. With the building and symbol of democracy dramatically damaged, this ironically paved the way for the start of the Nazi regime, since the blaze served as the perfect opportunity to dispose of potential rivals and threats. The parliament was moved to another location, and the Reichstag was left in ruins. To add insult to injury, the building was also the target of Allied bombings during the war, furthering its desperate state. In the years after World War II, the Reichstag sat neglected until the 1970s, when it was turned into a museum for German history. 20 years later, in 1990, after the reunification of Germany, the Reichstag was returned to its former glory by an architect named Norman Foster and became a seat of government once again. Number 4. Benedictine Abbey of Monte Casino. The origins of the Benedictine order of monks sprouted in the Italian town of Cassino. First built in 529 AD, the Monte Casino monastery sat at the top of a hill overlooking the town below. Although it had gone through many repairs over the many years, at the start of World War II, the abbey building itself was at least 400 years old, having been constructed around the 16th or 17th century. Inside the building were many priceless manuscripts and artifacts created and collected by the monks over almost 1,500 years of history. As World War II broke out and the conflict grew closer towards Monte Casino, many of the manuscripts were moved to Rome for safety. This proved to be an incredibly wise choice. The monastery and casino would hold out for most of the war, with many attempts to take it failing. By January 1944, the Allied forces were running out of ideas on how to take the monument, strongly believing that it was a German stronghold due to its locations and fortifications. Tragically, this was not the case. Although German forces were camped out on the slopes below, the only people inside the monastery were 2 monks and some scared citizens from the town that were taking shelter there. On February 15, 1944, Allied bombs carried by B-17, B-25, and B-26 planes rained down on Monte Casino. The structure was decimated, with only a few walls left standing. The statue of Saint Benedict in the center did manage to survive, but it had been brutally decapitated. The 2 monks managed to live, but 115 civilians did not. The bombing of Monte Casino remains one of the most controversial decisions the Allied forces made during World War II. Ironically, after the site's destruction, the Germans did occupy the site, but never while it stood proud as the flagship of the Benedictine order. Number 3. Royal Crescent, Bath. The city of Bath in England is known for its famous Roman bathhouses and its gorgeous Georgian architecture. One of the finest examples of this is the Royal Crescent in the center of the city. This row of terraced buildings are linked together in a semicircle surrounding a lush, green park and have been a backdrop for many movies and TV shows. To start, Bath was seen as a safe location during World War II, unlike the nearby port city of Bristol. As a result, many evacuees from larger cities like London were sent there to avoid the bombing raids. On April 25, 1942, the sirens began to wail in the historic city. The people initially didn't think anything was wrong and that the actual target would be Bristol, since it always had been. But as the bombs started to fall, the masses frantically ran to seek shelter. But why was Bath getting bombed? On March 28, 1942, the British Air Force bombed the German port city of Lübeck, which was a historical town with wood homes. This raid destroyed 40% of them. Hitler was enraged and promised payback. Bath was the perfect target. Many buildings were destroyed and over 400 people lost their lives. Among them were some houses on the Royal Crescent, their insides stripped by the incendiary bombs. Many buildings and areas were devastated for many years after the war. Thankfully, the houses of the Royal Crescent were restored, but many structures still needed to be fully rebuilt, but were sadly never replaced. Number 2. The City of Hamburg and Operation Gomorrah. The city of Hamburg in Germany was a prime target for Allied forces during World War II. As the country's main port, an industrial center, and the location of many important German shipyards and U-boat pens, it was the perfect striking point. But not many expected how badly Hamburg would be destroyed. In the last week of July 1943, Operation Gomorrah commenced. Over 8 days, 8 square miles of the city would be completely obliterated. Although the bombers used plenty of explosives, over 9,000 tons worth, the main source of devastation came from the bombing's firestorm, with the winds sweeping the flames through the city. The flames were so powerful that one survivor, Paul Peters, reported that the firestorm was so strong that hats were torn off heads and whirled through the air like burning fireballs. Even little children running around alone were bodily picked up from the ground and thrown through the air. 1 million people escaped from Operation Gomorrah, but a staggering 42,600 people lost their lives and another 37,000 received injuries. To put that into perspective, over 5,000 people were dying every single day in one city alone. Once the fires died down and the damage was surveyed, over 60% of Hamburg had been razed to the ground. Number 1. Buckingham Palace. Bombing in World War II was so extensive that not even royalty escaped its clutches. When you pair that with the infamous Friday the 13th date, the story gets even more incredible. On Friday the 13th, September 1940, the King and Queen of England, George IV, and Elizabeth, mother of the recently deceased British Queen, were enjoying breakfast with a cup of tea. Their peace and quiet would soon be disturbed by the screaming sounds of a bomb falling before 5 explosive missiles hit Buckingham Palace in the capital city of London. They managed to destroy the Royal Chapel, Inner Quadrangle, Palace Gates, and the Queen Victoria Memorial. Despite this and more bombings over the coming months, the royal family remained resilient, with the Queen even noting that she could now sympathize with those in the East End of London, whose homes had been targets during the Blitz. Even in the face of calls by government officials to leave the country for safety, the royal family refused to leave Buckingham Palace. The Queen even made a statement saying, "The children will not leave unless I do, I shall not leave unless their father does, and the King will not leave the country in any circumstances whatever." Although it was hit many more times and was an attractive target for German strikes, Buckingham Palace never received lasting significant damage and casualties were few. Instead, the building stood as a symbol of British resilience in the face of the terrifying Blitz. Thanks for watching. Have you ever heard about the history of these buildings before? Let us know in the comments below and don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time for another amazing video right here on American Eye.